place where I was posting these migrated to WordPress.com, and so I was pretty much drafted to go to WordPress. But once I got there, I really liked it, so I began to post some more. Most of the things that are on my page are um, are recent, but many of them are the work that I've been doing for years. And I get to a certain subject or a certain point, and I formalize my thinking a little bit, so I feel confident putting something up there. I'm actually working on a manuscript of about a theory of consciousness that I have. So it's all that is in the service of that endeavor.
Okay. Yeah, and I really like your blog has like this blend of like spirituality and science. I really I like your blog. I think you pulled.
Yeah, I mean, and it's not your typical scientific view. I realize that, but I still am very interested, and I'm compelled by the science of the day in order to augment what I'm actually doing. So it's a blending, and I think that's where the best goal can be when you got to have them both. I don't think it's one or the other. Yeah, I hear somebody's ocean.
Somebody's ocean.
You hear that ocean sound?
Does somebody live by the ocean here? I would hope. It's not me. What about you? What about you, Jim?
Well, let's see. I guess I'm a good bit older than Toby, right? And I don't know about you, John. I guess you are just judging from your picture. I guess you're a little bit older than Toby, also, right?
But yeah, you can't see me now, though, right?
No. But I've done a lot of things in my life and career. My undergraduate degree is in anthropology, and I guess some of the posts I have you can see relate directly to early human evolution, right? But also I've been, after some time in the Peace Corps and a couple other things, I ended up migrating into information technology. So I've been, a software developer probably for about 30 years, going all the way back to the mainframes in COBOL, on through C, C++, and Java development, and various other things. A lot of the things I put on the blog are things that just things I've thought about for a long time, and just finally decided that it's time I was throw them out there in writing and see what people thought about them. Okay. I'm kind of all over the place, I would guess, as far as some of the topics I deal with. It seems somewhat eclectic because I do deal with like I said, things like evolution, and I may be dealing some more with some political type stuff going forward also. Anyway, I have a pretty wide range of what I deal with, not just consciousness, but that's a pretty big focus.
Okay, you're kind of like a blend, Jim, of like John and Toby. I think you're like almost like right in between them in some ways, I think. But all right, so I mean, you guys know who I am. I write the blog Utopia or Dystopia. I'm interested in really where science meets up with a lot of like moral and philosophical concerns. So I just explore that on the blog. But in my day job, I work as a teacher. Sometimes I'm a professor. Sometimes I work or most of the time I work for a place called the Distance Learning Project that provides online learning. So I deal with technology, but I'm in no sense a technologist. I guess maybe like to start out, like because we're dealing with what I did is when I picked these topics, I picked things that were deliberately as broad, right? I really wanted like philosophical conversation around these issues. So maybe like what I want to do is I want to establish like how each of you guys understands what consciousness is, just so we have an idea of what the assumptions of the other person are going in. So it's like, because I think we would have a tendency to maybe collide with assumptions, and I just want to make sure that we're talking about the same thing, and if we're not talking about the same thing, that we know, what the other guy thinks. So what do you think, Toby? Like, I know you said you're not, it's peripheral to your studies, but how would you define it? What do you mean by it?
I suppose I would probably define it as in the entirety of our awareness, so that I guess people like to talk about qualia as our raw fields. If we have a collection of qualia, then they just kind of coalesce and form more and more complex representations of the world, and those representations are our consciousness.
Okay. How would you define it, John?
I think it's an interesting idea that we even can, in some ways, definitively define it. Obviously, there's a great deal of disagreement or lack of agreement about what exactly it is. I was actually reading today from the guy who couldn't be here today, Sidram or whatever his name is.
Yep.
He suggested a book, The Mind's Eye, with Daniel Dennett and Douglas Hofstadter.
It's
that one.
This book.
Yeah, he suggested it, and in that introduction, it says that John John's attempt to define consciousness was a process in which information about multiple individual modalities of sensation and perception is combined into a unified, multidimensional representation of the state of the system and its environment, and integrated with information about memories and the needs of the organism, generating emotional reactions and programs of behavior to adjust the organism to its environment. That's quite a mouthful. And I think that this is precisely the problem that we're all interested in, Rick, is the fact that to say such a thing, it automatically constrains what it could be.
Right.
And all the attempts that we have currently of people trying to define it, all of your empirically minded folk are wanting to base it in some way on the physiology of the brain, and to say that the brain is producing it somehow. And the folks who have a more spiritual or a more non-physical component, something a little more ineffable in mind, really sort of go against the grain to that sort of suggestion. And it has always been that most of the things you're going to read are going to be one way or the other. They're not going to be in the middle somewhere. And that seemed to me the niche that I could fill, because it seemed like nobody was doing it. So now I'm doing it. I'm saying that there's clearly a link between the physiology of the brain, our cognitive function, and a more ineffable component. And again, without being able to, empirically demonstrate it, or, to define it in terms that are acceptable to someone who has a more empirical view.
So and this, I certainly take away from your blog, John, is like you believe in like the numinous or whatever they call it. It's just like there's some kind of spiritual realm or like that we tap into with our consciousness. It's somehow there, and we somehow tap into it. Is that
right? It's something that pervades and supports, and is the foundation for existence in the first place. And we perceive it and reach into it and interact with it as temporal beings, but it clearly has components, at least, if not the very foundation of consciousness completely. It's definitely not in the brain. I think that's a given, at least from my point of view, from all of the research and study that I've conducted. I just don't see how anyone could be not fascinated by the idea that we might comprehend it at some point, but no one seems willing to put the two pieces together, the two, the ineffable and the definitive. It just doesn't seem like anybody wants to do that, and I think it has to contain both. What you're saying.
Yeah, I think later I hope to get, because this leads to your conclusion that machines therefore can't be conscious, or they won't be conscious in the way that human beings are, right?
Yeah, that's a real thorny issue too, because the very problem that I have with machines being conscious is the same problem I have with you being conscious. I mean, clearly you appear to be conscious to me, and I can interact with you in ways that demonstrate a degree of ability mentally that certainly would suggest you could be conscious, but to know definitively whether or not you physically are conscious or not is totally conjecture on my part. I can't define it. So how would I know if a machine is if I can't even know if you are? I mean, with certainty now, I'm saying.
Yeah. And that's okay. So that's a big question. So let's
that is big. Yeah.
Let's hold it off, and then Jim, maybe you could give us your view.
Well, I think I probably agree more with John's approach, but I mean, I don't know that there's that much conflict with Toby's. What I prefer, I definitely you can think of consciousness as we typically do think of it as some kind of subjective awareness, right? It could be awareness of external entities as well as our own internal thoughts and self-generated objects, for example, in dreams. Obviously, you think that certainly seems like to be the top of consciousness. As far as well, maybe it's not the top. Maybe there is more a transcendent consciousness or a cosmic consciousness in addition to that some people have been able to experience either through their ability or effort in some way. But I think sitting below that consciousness is in fact of other realms. Almost you can almost think of an iceberg sort of thing. I mean, these lower realms I think are to some degree even probably present in humans. But I think what I'd like to emphasize is the sort of the continuity between life and consciousness. And one of my posts was that the algorithm nature of life. I think I forget the exact name of the post right now, but that the Paul Davies post where basically talks about the origin of life being where suddenly matter begins to store information and begins to be able to take that information and direct or in a causal way the actions of the organism. So that is sort of like sort of how he defines the beginning of life. Well, if you think of life as that, then if you just think of consciousness as just a continuation of that development. It's a continuation of our ability to gain information about the environment, to manage the internal state of the organism, and as well as eventually with the consciousness we have, we're able to direct nature externally to our organism also. And so I like to emphasize the continuity of consciousness with life, and for all I know, it may turn out when we understand the beginnings of life, we may understand that there's a continuity from some even lower level at the quantum level or something like that.
Have you heard Jim about it? Like, I think I might have brought this guy up to you before. He's a neuroscientist, Antonio Damasio. Have you heard of him?
Yeah. I think I bought his book, and I looked at it a little bit, and I haven't really focused on it enormously.
I was watching. He has a thing on TED. He did a TED conference a while back. I think it might have been 2011 about this question. And he's a neuroscientist, so he's approaching it from that direction. But he was doing something. He was talking about the brainstem, and what he was saying is that, okay, well, what's consciousness? And the only thing he could kind of define it in a negative. So he said, we know, like, when a person is under deep anesthesia, deeply asleep, dead, you know what I mean? They don't have consciousness. So it's whatever it is that's it's not that. So it has to do with this flow of the mind that happens from the moment we really wake up and are actually awake. You know what I mean? Until somehow that system like shuts itself off. And he was talking about these people who had a brain injury to a very narrow part of their brainstem. It's a very, very narrow part, very narrow and specific part. And when that was damaged, they were comatose and in no way conscious. That is, like, there could be brain activity, but if they were brought back, there would be no recollection of that activity. So it's like they had no access to the fact that this activity was taking place in their brain. And then he said that but in this other section, if you had right next to it, there was another section on the brainstem, and if that section was damaged, you had a different type of experience where you were paralyzed. You were completely paralyzed. You could do nothing at all with your body. Your total body was paralyzed, and yet you were conscious, right? So it was like very narrow scope. You damage one, no consciousness. Damage the other, you're conscious, but you don't. And his whole theory, and he's looking at it totally in a biological sense, is that consciousness is about the brain's kind of like regulation of the body. Like, it has to do with this feedback mechanism where the brain is kind of looking at the body and kind of like trying to figure out about the body and then outside of the body. So it's like it arises because of basically feedback from yourself to both your brain to your own body, and then kind of like ripples out from there to body to the world, right? I mean, and I don't know, I don't know if that leaves room or not for any kind of numinous element to it. I don't know. It's like we're well, maybe I should just leave that there, and then maybe go to Toby, because Toby, you don't believe in any kind of numinous realm, right?
No, I don't believe in it, although I don't exclude its possibility either. I think it's another one of those things that is really hard to either prove or disprove.
But it has to be relevant, though. It has to be relevant. That's not necessarily provable. Completely agreement there, but
yeah.
What do you all think of this, of the Persinger experiment that I posted on my blog? Right? I think you responded to that, right, Toby?
Yeah.
Okay, remind us about it there, Jim.
Well, I mean, basically, Persinger has done a lot of experimentation with. Now, admittedly, this experiment's a little bit rigged up, but it certainly indicates something, unless it's just a hoax or a complete misinterpretation of data. But what Persinger did was he's done a lot of experimentation with exposing the brain to magnetic fields, and he's done a lot of work on temporal lobe, and he was exposing the temporal lobe to magnetic fields, and a high percentage of people will have almost religious experiences and things of that nature when they do that. So for a long time, I thought of him as sort of a person who was the brain, and all this stuff is in the brain and in physiology. But then he did an experiment where he sort of exposed people to a magnetic field, and it's a particular type of rotating magnetic field at a particular rate. And he took two groups of people and put them in two different rooms, and he was monitoring their brain waves. And he, on one group of people, he started showing flashing lights, and he looked at the brainwave patterns of them seeing the flashing lights, and then you could see the same brainwave patterns in the people in the other room who were not exposed to the flashing lights. So the hypothesis being is that there really is some kind of potential communication outside the brain, physiological brain. By the way, I don't think this necessarily says that consciousness lies completely outside the brain, and that we just tap into it, right? I do believe that there may be boundaries beyond the brain, right, that are involved in this.
Yeah, but it would seem to me that to like to hold tight to the hypothesis would require like multiple verification. You know what I mean? Like you're like this is one set of experiments out of a series of experiments that they've done on ESP and things like that for generation now, and they haven't come up with anything, right? So we got this example, and the thing is that can you build out from it? Can you prove? Can you what I mean? Can you replicate this experiment multiple times, right? And
actually, I think this was replicated 3 times in the actual article, right? And I'm not sure whether it's replicated by anybody other than Persinger.
Yeah.
But I have to go back and look at the article. But it's and I think he's gone on with some other things that are somewhat indicative of the same behavior.
So there's indications that there could possibly be components to consciousness that are interactive with the cognitive function of the brain, and that it's entirely possible that the functioning of the brain is required in order to perceive the consciousness in the first place. That's all still speculative, but it's still certainly in the mix. It's clearly the brain is interactive, not just with the thoughts and memories and the brain function, but it's also interactive with feelings and emotions and ideas, which all those things are completely incorporeal. You can't, hold it in your hand an idea and say, there it is, this idea is in my hand. It does exist, but it certainly isn't physically or temporally observable or provable. You certainly know that they're there. The same thing, which I just recently, Jim and I just had a comment on my blog when he mentioned that it would be you're going to have certain aspects of existence that must be inferred. And the best example currently being dark matter and dark energy. They observe the physical universe out there, and with every empirical evidence that we've been able to gather, and with every scientific principle that we apply to that information, we infer that there must exist 90% of the universe is invisible. It's dark matter. It's not even perceptible to us, but it must be there in order for us to exist in the state that we exist currently. So it's not so far-fetched to think that consciousness is manifest through the brain and through our cognitive function and through our body sensors and the central nervous system, that it could completely feasible that it could entail aspects and components that are not perceptible to us directly. And I think that's the foundation of what you're trying to say there. It certainly is something that has, in order for us to know anything, it has to be manifest in the temporal. We can't simply conjure something out of nothing and say, well, there it is. Everything that we know, everything that we feel, everything that we sense, all of our abilities as cognitive creatures rely on our brain and our cognitive system, but they could clearly be interacting with, in some capacity of which we are not currently aware or perceptive of, elements and components that are not physical, that are not temporal.
Yeah, but you got anything in response to that, Toby?
I guess something I was thinking of as that conversation was going on was to do with how exactly we can try to reproduce consciousness in machines, or at least try to, and see what results we get. And I mean, the Turing test, you've probably all heard of it, it doesn't seem like a perfect example. John Searle said that if you've got a machine that just spits out words, it might not actually be conscious. But I don't know that it was the Chinese room is a very good representation of what's going on in the brain. That's a very, very simple model of what would be generating language. If we get a good enough model of what the brain is doing and manage to produce that in a machine, and it does, for all intents and purposes, really behave quite consciously, even to the point where we can ask it to visualize, say, the African savanna and tell us what it sees, and it can carry on a conversation in that kind of way, we would have to start thinking that it seems to be forming mental images and representing these things and able to communicate them in a way that we would have to be getting close to saying that it is conscious, admitting that it is conscious, I would think.
Yeah, and I think that almost like, you know how John before you had been like, you don't know, it's that the idea of whether or not a machine is conscious is part of the same question you would have as if I'm conscious or anyone else you're talking to is conscious. But that when you're talking about inferring something, that's something we can really infer, right? Like I don't have really evidence that you're conscious, but that is something that I should infer. Like, based on all of my based on even just like common sense reasoning, I should infer it that you're conscious. So if we had a machine that exhibited consciousness in the same respect that we did, we would probably have to infer, or it might be wise to infer, that it had similar internal experiences to ourselves, right? Like
right now, it sounds on the surface of it to be a reasonable conclusion. The problem I have with it mostly is that we were not manufactured in the same way that such a machine would have to be. We have spent hundreds of thousands, millions of years evolving as biological creatures, and finally, after hundreds of millions of years, I guess you'd say, we finally started to have a cognitive apparatus attached to our nervous system that was made it possible for us to be self-aware. And I agree to a certain extent that my inability to confirm in the same way that I can confirm my own consciousness, I can't confirm yours, but I know, based on my observations, that you are so enough alike me. You're certainly animated, and I think it's safe to say you're alive, and you're breathing. You're a biological creature, and if consciousness is something that only is possible to experience if you are alive, if you are a living thing, then it certainly wouldn't be possible for a machine to be conscious at that point. But what you're saying is it good enough? Is a machine that can interact with me and have a conversation just like we're having, and I'm sitting here going, darn, that machine, that sure sounds a lot like Rick. He responds in the same way, he tells the same corny jokes, he's still an amazingly smart fellow, but he's not alive. And I'm just saying that it's a personal point of view to me that the living is a requirement for experience, to perceive and to comprehend and to appreciate the fullness of our existence. To be self-aware is something that requires life. You have to be alive. That's just my opinion. I'm not saying.
This kind of brings me to a question for Toby, and then it will wind up that I'll end up with Jim, because it's like I think they both kind of address this in much different ways. So for Toby, like it's my perception, and you're going to tell me, like you could inform me. You know what I mean? You're pursuing a PhD in artificial intelligence, so you'll know far more than I would. But it's my interpretation that AI's really hit a bottleneck. Right, like the systems that we're coming up with are they're very good at what they do, but they're not exhibiting the same kind of intelligence you would see in human beings. Like I saw this guy, neuroscientist again, David Eagleman, his name was, and he was talking about Watson, right? And he like the computer quiz game, and he said, Watson can answer all these questions, but it can't answer a question like if you asked it, if Barack Obama enters a room, does his nose go with him? It can't answer that question. So it's like it's incredibly good at kind of like putting information together, but it doesn't have awareness in that sense. So it's like it seems like what's happening is that they're hitting a bottleneck, and in order to try to get around this bottleneck or break through the bottleneck, they're turning to the way that the brain works to try to re-engineer from the way the brain works to get to their goal of AGI, artificial general intelligence, or whatever. Is that am I correct in that interpretation, or am I like where, or am I
off? Where am I think there's quite a bit of truth in that. going down the path where they have with Watson, where they're basically just using an enormous database of written words, and have very powerful algorithms and a lot of computers working in parallel just to crunch the words and try and find relationships and set probabilities to what the answer of a question might be. It's doing natural language processing in a sense, but it's not doing it in a natural way at all, I don't think. So yes, there are.
So it doesn't mean that it wouldn't be conscious or intelligent. It would just mean that it's a different kind of intelligence, and whether or not it's conscious is still a matter of some speculation.
Yeah, it's certainly a very narrow type of consciousness, I would say. Broader than maybe than what has been developed before, so broader than Deep Blue, the chess-playing computer, but still quite narrow. It probably wouldn't understand pictures and those sorts of relationships, like you said, Rick, about Obama walks into a room, his nose goes with him. And there are lots of researchers trying the other approach of looking for more natural ways of forming representations and finding patterns in the world. So I did write an article and have looked into a bit these deep neural networks that seem to be doing a very good job, saying do a very good job of recognizing images and translating language, let's say Chinese to English.
Now, do they work? Do they work on similar processes as we understand the brain to work, or is this something much different?
They are quite related. So they have individual neurons that work in a semi-random way, and they have potentially thousands of these neurons and millions of connections, and they train them by applying lots of data and finding gradually that these layers can be self-organized mostly, and then trained with some labels for the data to actually just narrow the representations it's got to really clue onto specific features of images. And one of the great things about these neural networks is that you can actually say, well, I want to see what you think an image of a cat is, and activate a cat at one end, and then it can spontaneously generate an image of a cat. And that's similar to what happens in our minds.
The thing that's really interesting about it is that if you can create a synthetic neural network that responds to input in the same way that ours does, it's still going to require that our physical input from our sensory organs and our senses through the central nervous system to the brain. It's feeding it all the time with this sort of stimulus and data. It's still a sensation of putting your hand on something and touching it, or feeling a baby's hand on your face. The actual sensation itself is interpreted by your sensory apparatus, and your central nervous system sends it to the brain, and the brain interprets it. So it's so easy to want to say that we could artificially recreate those conditions and send the same sort of to a neural network, and that thing is going to somehow be the same as the actual skin sensors on your skin receiving the tactile information that's being sent to the brain, and the brain interpreting it. And after millions of years of evolution providing us with those abilities, we're just going to figure out how it does it and then just put it into a machine and it's going to work. I'm saying that's the interesting thing, that for somehow we think that we could simply reproduce the physical structure and create the process and algorithms which simulate the way we receive data in our brain, and it's all just going to coalesce into this guy who's going to pop up and say, "Hey, what took you so long to create me?"
On that score, I think that, and I don't know what your feelings are about this, Toby, because I think this is just the engineering hurdle seemed very high, and and they're especially higher than someone like Ray Kurzweil or something would give us any indication of. Like we really don't know how the brain works. Like we're really not quite, we haven't quite figured it out. And that's, you see this like that, this brain project that Barack Obama announced and stuff. It's an attempt to pour a lot of money in that to try to like figure that out. But we're not really anywhere near that. And we'll need to do that in order to be able to translate this into some kind of AI. And then on top of that, we're not only going to need to know how the brain works, but we're going to need to know how to replicate that using kind of like subsystems that aren't biological. So it's like we got a number of hurdles in front of us, and then even after that, I think we need to like figure out how not only how a conscious being would interact, but kind of like its interactions, how it negotiates its interactions with other things. Like we're a long way from even making an artificial dog that could relate to you like a real live dog. Like it's just the hurdles are a lot higher, I think, than some like in the singularity community would have us believe, right? Am I right?
Yeah,
okay.
There are certainly some hurdles.
Okay. And then I guess this kind of wraps to Jim. Jim, is it your view that if let's say we did understand how the brain worked, like we knew it, we figured it all out, would we be able to then, do you think it's pretty clear that we would be able to then replicate the kind of consciousness you see in human beings in some kind of machine?
Well, I think we have to back up a little bit here, and I think I have to kind of separate out two issues. Okay. One issue is whether or not we could take through software programming, neural networks, or whatever means in the future comes about, whether or not we could create a reasonable facsimile of a dog or a person, something that would be so real to us that we would infer that it has consciousness. Okay, that question is, I think, yes, that'll happen. That will happen eventually. Okay, there may be, as you mentioned, engineering hurdles to do that. But I think eventually that we will be able to accomplish that. Now, the other question is, will that entity or that we create actually be conscious? And that's where I would tend to say no. Okay, although there is the problem of, well, I don't know that it's not conscious, right? Just as I don't know you're conscious, right?
It's the same problem.
Yeah, it's the same problem. But my belief is that consciousness is somehow tied directly to I'm getting some echoes here. I don't know whether you're hearing them or not.
Yeah, the one thing you can do if people get echoes, like what I've found to do this, is like if people who are not speaking, if you mute your microphone, like that'll cut back on any feedback, or it should.
Yeah. But what I believe is that I believe that there is something definite about the carbon atom. And the molecular structures that it's able to form, that is able to produce the subjective sensation of consciousness. And I'm not sure I have a firm scientific basis for that statement, but I certainly believe it. I believe that's true. And if that's the case, then the only way we could produce a truly conscious entity would be basically to produce a carbon-based entity that's probably based very much upon the similar molecular structures that are in life forms. And if that's the case, if that's the case, I would argue that we've basically just created another living entity, and yes, it could be conscious.
Let me ask you then what you think about this thing I've heard of recently. Like recently, I guess that they have you ever heard of the artificial hippocampus? I don't know if you've heard of it. Basically, it's it is a the hippocampus is a part of the brain that's responsible for basically memory, right? It's not so much a place where memory is located as it's kind of like a sorter, and it sorts where memories go.
Right, for the formation of memory.
Yeah, and what they did, scientists have no idea how the hippocampus works. All they know is that it has this like grid-like structure. It's structured like a grid. So what they did is they replicated that grid, not with biological materials, but with some kind of bioelectronics. They replicated that, and then they put it in a person's head, right? Who had I don't know, damage from the hippocampus from a stroke or from an accident or what, and it worked. The person, their memory worked their memory went from dysfunctional to back to normal. So it's it's obvious. At least if that kind of rule holds true, you know what I mean. There's ways. There are at least parts of the brain can be its architecture can be replicated by a machine. So it's obviously that. So I don't know how that. I don't know how you would answer that, Jim. Like what do you think's going on there, or whether or not you think that detracts from your view or doesn't.
Well, I think I'd have to see the actual study, and see what they actually did, right? It's obviously you can put in artificial hearts. We might be able to produce some sort of artificial liver or something in the future too. I mean, it's true you might be able to replace certain organs and certain discrete pieces of functionality. Whether or not that will lead to whether or not that means that you can replace everything is another matter.
Right. And I mean, it's even possible that we may find that we need some kind of biological components, and it sounds kind of Frankensteinish, but we might actually make a machine that has partial biological components, right? That somehow replicate things in the brain that we can't necessarily replicate in machines. That's
the new book that Ray Kurzweil has out, How to Create a Mind, speaks to this very thing, and he talks about the neocortex being pretty much the real hot bed of contention, where our own neocortex is so pivotal and so important to being aware and having consciousness and all that he says that we may not be able to reconstruct the entire brain, but we may be able to construct an artificial neocortex, which could then augment our current abilities mentally and cognitively, and by doing so, advance us as a species. Now, it's an interesting thing to me from Ray Kurzweil, because he obviously thinks we can do the whole kit and caboodle. He thinks we can get a machine going, but to have him sort of step back a little bit in this book and say, it may just be that all we're really going to be able to do is to augment what we have, but it's still really important that we do it. It's still amazing in its premise. But what you're talking about is a degree of complexity and to a replication on a scale that is so beyond anything we're capable of currently. I guess even if we're only able to reproduce certain parts of the brain, and in doing so, like you said, the hippocampus could be replaced to somebody who has a damage. That's like amazing. And so would someone who has like a Mozart, who has this part of his brain that makes them a genius. And if we could recreate that and then augment our own brain in the same way, that could actually be something that could really advance us as a species and maybe make it possible for us to come up with a device that's conscious. You know what I mean?
Well, by the way, I just went to Wikipedia on your artificial hippocampus,
Mm-hmm.
and basically it says they've developed a working hippocampal prosthesis. I can't pronounce that right.
Yeah.
that has just passed the live tissue test.
Oh, so it's not, they haven't.
Implantation in a live rat, apparently.
Okay.
And then the monkey is planned in the near future.
Okay.
Right, but it still made it possible for whatever they implanted it in to do what it normally does. That was the point.
Perhaps.
Yeah. No, I mean, you're right. You're right, Jim. I think I probably heard that in passing. You know what I mean? And thought, it came to my mind when you were talking. But certainly, if they can replicate that in a lab, if it goes over the human hurdle, then it's something that I think that needs to be taken. Even in these initial studies, it's still something that needs to be taken seriously as a possibility, right? But yeah, if I mischaracterized that, sorry. You know what I mean? I was just from memory.
That's fine.
Okay. I think this maybe goes I guess what I'm trying to think of where exactly I was jumping to next. We're going to next. The one I don't know if you've ever heard of this guy, John. Kevin Kelly, his name is. Have you ever heard of Kevin Kelly?
Doesn't ring a bell.
Yeah, Kevin Kelly. He's a technologist guy, but he's also a Christian, right? But he's not like your kind of like run of the mill Christian. He has like a real technological kind of focus on his Christianity. But and the reason I'm bringing him up is that he's tried to approach this because he believes in like a spiritual realm. So he's had to approach this question of like artificial intelligence. And what he said, I just thought it might be something for you to think about, is that when a being reaches that point, right, it kind of like reaches an ensouled state, right? Like if we ever were able to actually make something like that, and he said it in and I don't necessarily agree to this. I'm just kind of like bringing it up for your thought or reflection. He said, I too am a child of God, right? Like that the machine responds to him, right? That you would know that we had reached that point, right? So it's like you can't. At least in his view, you know what I mean, and this is kind of like the general lesson I'm taking from what he said, is that we can't create this sharp line between, it's biological and we made it. It's like if it crosses some kind of point, it's entered a point where not only does it qualify for our respect, but it somehow enters the same kind of like existential kind of characteristics of the universe that we share, right?
Right, and here lies one of the really important points too, Rick, about this: the interaction that you know with other people. And I'm not talking about just casual, but I mean your intimate relationships with your family, your brothers, siblings, mother, father, whatever. The person that you have loved deeply or have a connection to a close friendship that goes beyond anything otherwise describable as friendship. There's those moments when I spoke of in my blog about how when you hold your flesh and blood child in your arms and you feel a connection, you feel a life existing in your arms. I mean, it's not just my brain telling me, oh, it's your baby, you have to protect it, and it's flesh of your flesh, so you should be responding to it with a lot of stimulation. I'm saying a deeply personal, intimate connection that goes beyond meeting the guy on the street who dropped his wallet and you picked it up and handed it to him. I don't know that guy. I don't have a connection to him in the same way I had to this flesh and blood child of mine. And yes, there's a lot of other stuff involved there. There's the emotion. There's the fact that it is flesh of my flesh. There's a genetic inheritance. The whole bunch of stuff that's wrapped up in all that. But even with people you don't know, you may encounter someone. I like to use this example because it happened to me, that you meet someone and instantly you know that person is conscious, that you think alike, that you feel something, your whole being is stimulated in ways that don't normally happen with just anybody who you happen to encounter. There's a very special relationship that suddenly and inexplicably and profoundly makes itself known to you. And you can't just, explain it away as being, well, it's my baby, naturally. I have a friend who I spoke with every day. I saw them every single day on my way home from work. We always talked. This nice friendship, nothing special. This person brought in a person, his sister, who had a baby, and I just completely and totally felt exactly the same wanting to be and felt a connection to that child. So again, I'm only speaking from my own experience in that regard, but I think everyone has that notion, like, and even as I'm looking at you on this little video that's sitting on my computer screen, I immediately, when I heard your voice and I saw you and you were moving around, I got an immediate sense that there was something. It was like you were there. You're really there. You know what I mean? And I'm not saying I'm not explaining myself very well, but the fact remains that you're aware of these things cognitively, but you also feel them, you see them, you know them, you experience them. And if you're experiencing something, and you and I both had this like revelation at the same moment, and you're like, you see the connection, you feel the reality of this non-corporeal aspect to the relationship. It's not just something that's a result of my brain sending a message to the amygdala and saying, John, have this great emotional uplifting experience. I think we're having the experience, and the amygdala says, feel like this because you are having that experience. That's just how I see it. I'm not saying I'm right. I'm just saying that's how I see it.
It kind of brings me to, it brings me to what I guess I'd call like a creator's dilemma. And this is like a question I think for Toby. Toby, okay, let's just say it's theoretically possible to build these types of conscious machines, right? Let's say it's theoretically possible. I mean, do you think that they will share do you think that they will be like us in the way that they will, kind of like John was just kind of laying out, really what John laid out was the experience of what it means to be human, right? And these things won't be human. So it's I wonder if it's it's in a lot of ways we have a creator's dilemma, I don't know if I can really frame myself well, but when we create these conscious entities, they're not going to come into the world with the same web of relationships that human beings exist in, right? They're going to exist in a different kind of relationship to their makers, right? And the thing is that what kind of maybe ethical concerns or philosophical concerns might that bring up? Is there something? Is there an ethical dimension to creating something that is as smart or has the same kind of experiences as a person, but yet they don't have these same web of relationships, and they are a product of a a corporation or an engineer?
Yeah, I think there certainly is and are ethical concerns. I guess when it comes to those experiences, I don't think that saying that they are caused by the brain makes them any less valuable, in my opinion. I'm not sure if that's how you feel, John, but I think it will be possible actually to make robots that can feel. One difference might be is that it would be possible to make them able to perceive the processes by which they're feeling. And that might make it seem less of a mystery and less powerful to them, perhaps. But if they are capable of being conscious, they should be able to have all the exact same subjective experiences we do, and even feel strong attachments and connections to people. In terms of, I've been trying to come up with an ethical framework for how to treat and deal with the possible existence of conscious machines. And that kind of comes a little bit back to what Jim was saying earlier about this continuum of information that early at the start of life, information managed to gain control of matter, that there was information stored in molecules that could reproduce themselves and produce more information. Eventually life got complex to the stage where there was actually a nervous system which seemed to be gathering information and controlling a whole collection of molecules by sending out electrical signals or whatever. We've gotten to the stage where we have much more, well, I'm not sure that they're necessarily more complex, but much higher level abstract descriptions and information stored in our brains. And so anything that has that kind of informational structure, and if we start to value this information, that informational structure that creates consciousness, that should be valued and treated as a conscious entity, as something that, in a sense, is alive, I think.
Yeah, I know. I mean, the one possibility, because I'm agnostic on this question, is that it will actually go beyond us in its ability to connect or to understand or to its emotional experiences. Will actually go beyond what we're capable of. I mean, one of the things is that when you hear like somebody like Hugo Degaris, which he's an AI. He's an AI guy, but he has like some very dire predictions. But the one thing is like this, if you take away his dire predictions, it's this idea that they will be in a different universe than we are. So our own kind of like particular concerns to our human scale will kind of not be there for these things. But you also wonder what would it be like if you were able to have conscious control over your emotions at all times, which is something like if you built this machine, why wouldn't it be able to control its own internal processes, even though we can't, right? So it's like, and they may actually open up horizons for consciousness itself that human beings are just limited from, right? I mean, it's a possibility, right?
Well,
It'll certainly be different.
Yeah.
I mean, this gets a lot into the. I guess are you familiar with the Bill Joy article, Why the Future Doesn't Need Us?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I am. You guys?
I mean, certainly, if there's no. I mean, and I think whether these machines are actually conscious or not is probably irrelevant. If we produce facsimiles of machines facsimiles of consciousness that are machines, I have no reason to believe that they would now outstrip us and go off and be able to make decisions on their own that could ultimately be to the human detriment.
Yeah, that's the Degaris. He actually, Jim, have you ever read the Archilect War? It's called. Mm-hmm. Now, if you want to scare yourself and not, have trouble sleeping for some time, you want to pick up that book. He wrote it, I think it was like in the early '80s. But basically, Degaris, he's an artificial intelligence guy. Like he works on these engineering problems, and he kind of follows that whole exponential curve, Moore's law, and he pushes it out to kind of see that in the very near future, as in like the fact like 50 years to a century, we're going to create machines that are much smarter than us, and then those machines are going to it kind of bootstraps itself. It's those machines create machines that are more smarter than more smart, and eventually they're going to get to such a point that they're in a way godlike, and then that those creatures are very unlikely to have human well-being in mind. That it's just as and it's not even that they would be anti-human. It's that they would have their own interest in mind, and we would be irrelevant to them, right? So they might just kind of like walk over us, right? Like and just end up kind of crushing humanity by default. And there also might be this that people would oppose the creation of these machines or the continuation of the machines, and they would kind of be. He calls them the what do they call it, Terrans or something, that they're like basically Luddites in a sense, that they don't want these machines to exist. But so his view is like he's like Joy on steroids. You know what I mean? Like so, he takes it up even a further notch, and he's literally says this is. He doesn't say so much it's fated. He's like, but this is very in the cards for him. Now I think he's got a whole set of underlying assumptions which I don't necessarily hold to. I don't know why. I don't think the problem is as easy as he makes it. That these problems become this problem of creating artificial intelligence is a problem that itself becomes exponentially more complicated as you go up a level. So it's not like we have these machines that are so smart and they so easily jump to the next level of smart. You know what I mean? I don't necessarily work that way. And the other prospect is like, why do we lose control over these machines? Like why? Like haven't we built in kind of fail safes to make sure that these things don't happen? I mean, but they're certainly
robot laws.
What's that?
The robot laws.
Yeah. Like I'll open up our asthma. But like Toby, do you have any fears of that? Like, do you think these fears are just overblown, kind of like apocalyptic kind of fears, or do you think that there's some reality behind them?
I do think they're a bit overblown. I'm not convinced that it's going to be that much of a challenge to make machines moral in terms of valuing not just human life but all life. I think there's actually a lot of value in life in general, and it shouldn't be too hard for machines to in some way be programmed or taught to see that value.
Well, yeah, but Toby, I mean, here's the problem. If you're arguing that we could make machines that really are like humans, then how successful have we been at making humans moral?
Making humans moral, yeah. Well, most people are. I mean,
most people are, but there's enough that are not that would cause a serious problem if a similar failure rate occurred with machines, right?
Yeah. The weird thing is, Jim, I wrote an article for the Utopia or Dystopia or Post, and it was called Psychobot, right? And it was about like that, these machines, we were building these robot machines, you know what I mean, that, like the drones or the other robots. But what I said in the article is that the subjective experience of these machines in a way is a lot like what it is for people who run us over, like psychopaths, right? The thing about a psychopath is that they're more machine-like than a machine, right? They don't care what the other person on the other side of them feel. That's how they're able to do these things. You know what I mean? And I know,
right? There's no empathy.
Yeah, there's no empathy with the other person, so they're able to commit these. They basically have I want this, and then they take the steps to take it without any thought of like the emotional ramifications on the person on the other side. Which is unless we build into these machines some kind of emotional feedback or like some kind of empathy. That very well might be the case, but it's like it's almost like like unless that system is inbuilt, we would have that problem. But if we built systems in it, like empathy systems in it, we might be able to circumvent it. Like it's almost like that. The idea that you know what I mean, that machines would act like bad people, kind of is predicated on the idea that we've replicated the same problem that we find with psychopaths, right, or sociopaths.
Right, and not only that, Rick, but also the problem that humans have had all along, where it took us a long time to figure out that taking care of each other is a better survival strategy than killing each other. The early hominids were tribal and regional and defending their group or their area, and if you were the stronger, you could go in there and take whatever food they had, and there's like all this stuff going on. And finally, after a long time, we figured out, well, it might be better if we just lived together in a village and shared the fruits of our hunts and our growing, and the cooperation became something that had a survival advantage. And again, this is the thing that one of the main points that makes it so difficult to imagine we can even accomplish this, because if you think about the Homo sapiens when they finally came along, some 40,000 years ago, they had the exact same brain, exact same nervous system, exact same sensory capabilities that we have now, but they didn't do anything to demonstrate that they were conscious at all. They didn't have any sort of way of, they had nothing to start with, so they had to build it up from the beginning. The brain isn't just a hodgepodge of neural networks that you can slap on a motherboard and make it conscious. It's something that has to be over a very long period of time. I mean, even a modern-day child is born with a completely intact brain, central nervous system. Everything is there. It still has some maturity to do, but it takes years to already have everything you need to start with to be aware. No one remembers being two. It's a functional thing.
Yeah, like I told you, with the current state of AI now, is it that the machines that they're building are, they're realizing that the way you have to go is actually interactive learning, and you can't just like download a rule or download or the information, like the way that the the way that you build the most workable machines or the most capable machines is actually to kind of replicate the way that human beings learn, which is, they interact with their environment, they get feedback, they make changes. You know what I mean? Like is because that's the one advantage it seems like machines would have is that they just be able to download. You know what I mean? They know everything now about medicine and they just know it. But it's like, in a way, the way human beings learn is like we learn through interaction. And, I'm not quite sure that you can. I'm not quite sure you could just throw facts in it and it actually has meaning. Like you need that interaction. Like, well, what's the status?
Experience.
Yeah, experience.
Well, yeah. Machine learning has a few different ways of going about getting experience and trying to form models or be able to make better predictions based on that experience. Most of the time they use terms like training and training data. So it's not quite the same sort of continuous and integrated experience that people have, but it could be heading that way.
Right, but it also means that it won't be the same end product. If it's not exactly the same way of getting there, it's going to be different in other ways that we are probably not anticipating very well.
Well, they're starting to make quite accurate models of individual neurons and how they operate by themselves and in networks. So the potential is there for them to eventually have quite accurate simulations of an entire brain, and there are research groups working towards that end.
Right. Structure is definitely something we'll definitely be able to do, but integrating it and animating it in a way that is, like Rick says, pretty much indistinguishable from a person who did it the other way, I think that's a totally different question. It's certainly possible, given the technology and the Moore's law. We're going to eventually have a device or some sort of a thing that has all of the same structures neurally and the connections, the trillions of connections that we have between neurons. We're all going to be able to manufacture something that has all those, but it's so much more complicated than that. That whatever it is going to be, it's going to be something quite different, even as similar as it might be, or as Rick said, as convincingly as it may be to convince us that in the same way that Rick convinces me that it's conscious.
You got any thoughts, Jim?
Well, the whole idea about somehow or other you can model, if you model all the individual neurons, you can somehow or other recreate the brain, right? And I'm not sure that completely works because I mean there seems to be pretty good evidence that that neurons don't necessarily have some fixed function. For example, if somebody suffers a stroke and some part of their brain related to speech is damaged, right? Well, then it's quite common that the person still regains some ability at speech, maybe even full ability at speech, or certainly significant ability at speech, because the brain dynamically repurposes neurons to do other functions. I think that the problem is that I'm not sure that neurons actually work by just transistor or a vacuum tube or whatever. Back in my days, there were vacuum tubes, where there's a series of inputs and a series of outputs, and basically this neuron does this, right? It seems to me almost as if the brain works by there's sort of a constant reprogramming of the neurons themselves. So that neurons that were one time doing one function can be dynamically turned into doing some other function. It's possible that we may be able to recreate that capability also, but just simply taking the neurons and reproducing them, I don't know that gets you where you want to be, right, in the long run.
Yeah, absolutely, and they are really focusing quite a lot now on what's usually called plasticity, the changes in the connections. That's where they see most of the action happening, is changes in the strengths between connections between different neurons, and that seems to be what's responsible for encoding a lot of the representations and changing the function of those neurons, because, as you say, the neurons in isolation don't represent anything. They don't mean anything if they fire or not, but it's within a system and those connections that inform exactly what the neuron activating represents.
Well, and the other thing that in this very same vein, where all human brains have very many qualities and characteristics in common, but each individual brain forms uniquely, not necessarily in the same structures form in the same general location, but each individual neuron's location is completely different in the configuration of the networks. Is similar and it acts in similar ways, but it is unique like a fingerprint as far as the actual. If you couldn't, like, if you just held my head still and pinpointed the location of every neuron, and then you went and did it again artificially, it wouldn't be me. It would be something very similar to me, but it wouldn't be me. So each one of those constructions confers the genes to tell these nerve cells where to go and where to end up and what the amygdala or the neocortex or whatever, the Wernicke's area. Everything is done by a formula basically the same, but in an absolutely irreproducible way, in specifically, I mean, in every detail.
Hey guys, what do you think about what do you think about wrapping up? My brain's done.
I guess one final comment, kind of in response to that is, you're right that each brain is unique. I mean, the gross structure of it they're quite similar to look at. They can even see that usually the folds in the neocortex are more or less in the same place. But I guess more or less. There's an interesting thing that we can think of something quite abstract like the number 3, and your concept of a 3 is probably kind of similar to my concept of a 3, and even though our brains are different, we can still both kind of appreciate that concept and have some sort of representation for it in our brains, even though our brains are differently structured.
And they're typically located in like the same place. Like when they do like brain scans, they're like, my picture of Angelina Jolie is in the same place as it would be in John's head. Like that right? Am I right about that?
Yeah. Well, not the exact
general
same place,
vicinity.
but in the general vicinity. And I'm not sure what that says for the opportunity to reproduce those kind of representations in other forms of material, but
I don't even know how true all that is, right? I mean, for example, the capabilities of speech are, I think, normally associated with I forget whether it's the left or the right hemisphere, but at any rate, they can be reversed, right? Just like some people are left-handed, some people are right-handed, right? So, I mean, you can have, and you can also have some people that are somewhat share the responsibilities, for example, of handedness between both hemispheres, right, to some degree. Something like an ambidextrous person. So, I think there is quite a bit of. There's probably like 80% of something will be in one hemisphere or the other hemisphere, for example. But for 80% of the population, but there's going to be some percentage that isn't. And also, it's very common for there to be some ability to shift from one hemisphere to the other based upon events that happen in a person's life. So I mean, it's back to the plasticity point you made, right? Where I think there's a good deal more plasticity and a good deal more variation there than there might be very common locations for things, but it's not. I don't think it's necessarily universally that way.
But we may be able to replicate this same plasticity, or even customized, I guess you could call it, characteristics in machines, right? Like, just like I guess we're assuming, machine means everyone, it's like Ford with his cars, like everyone's the same color black, like it's not, we could probably make these machines that if we could master the kind of general architecture, the way the system works, and these are big ifs, and replicate that somehow in a non-biological substrate, we would have machines that had the same plasticity that biological. And to me, that's an open question. I don't know if we would be able to do that or not. But it would obviously have to have that characteristic of plasticity, redundancy, ability for different components to do different parts based on its needs or interactions with the environment, right? Does that make sense? Maybe.
Yeah. I think that makes sense to me.
I'm getting tired.
Yeah.
Yeah. By the way, Rick, I thought you did a great job here as a moderator, right? I mean, I almost feel like you're the moderator more than.
Yeah. Well, I mean,
maybe you want to get in more of your own ideas into this, right? But it seems like you're more of a moderator between the three of us. But you did a great job.
Yeah. Oh, thanks. I'm doing this kind of to learn, right? And I didn't come in here with any set solid assumptions. This is my point of view. I thought all three of you guys really offered something unique to say, and I learned a lot in doing this.
I'm really looking forward to reading Jim and Toby's blog too. I've only had a chance to really sort of go over them briefly, and in particular when you consider that in isolation, I've been writing for years without this sort of interaction being even possible. Trying to find someone to have a conversation about consciousness is not exactly easy. But Rick, you really are to be commended, not only for organizing it, but for really allowing us to sort of put our own little parts in there, and together I think it really is interesting. Jim has a similar view to mine, but it's got variations that I hadn't even considered. And I admire your courageous posting of blog entries that are just like 7 pages long. You have courage beyond anything I've been able to master, at least at this point. And Toby clearly is on a path that would be so valuable to share what he's learning along the way, and what he concludes based on his research and study. I just think it's a great opportunity. It's a really good idea.
Yeah, I've really enjoyed it. I'm looking forward to the next one.
Yeah, what is on the next? What's the next one in the queue? You remember? I literally had my daughters pick it out of a hat. I put it in a hat and I was like, "Here, pick." And this is the one that they came up with first. But what?
Let me look. I think I have it on my email here. The discussion topic or something.
Yeah. I think it would be it's going to be number 2.
Relationship between religion, spirituality, and science.
Okay. Well,
that's a hotbed.
You got now. I don't know. Now, Toby, like if you people participate based on their interest. You know what I mean? If that's not a particular interest of yours, you know what I mean. That's cool with me. So just what I mean. Everybody take their pick on what I mean, what they think they're interested in. And we'll go from there. And there's some other participants. Hopefully, Surium, who's a really great blogger, really smart guy. Hopefully he'll participate as well. But do you guys have like a date preference you want to do? Like you want to hold this like in a month, 6 weeks? Anybody?
I'm fairly flexible.
You're really flexible?
A month is good for me. I think a month is about right.
So let's say
it's a nice round figure.
So that would put us what? And does anybody got a calendar in front of them?
But first Sunday of is it the first Sunday of April?
Yeah, that worked for me. Yeah, good with you guys.
This is the first Sunday in March, right? Yeah.
Okay. All right. If you guys have scheduling conflicts, something comes up, just let me know through email. I'll do the same. I'll try to see if this recording worked, and then I'll try to post it on my blog at some point with, like I said, links to your own blogs and maybe my own like summary of what you guys had to say about it.
Yeah, I think we should work on getting the pictures up there too. It just would be so much more interesting.
Yeah. I don't know why it worked. I mean, I can look into it. The other thing is
I think it's in the person themselves. I think Jim and Toby have to do something on their end to get it rolling.
I'll check in to see why my iPad doesn't do that for whatever reason.
Sounds good, Jim. Nice to see you.
I can look into it.
Nice to see you too, Toby. All right. Well, hey guys, this was fun. So
yeah, nice to meet you.
Okay, nice to meet you too.
All
right.
Yeah.
Great conversation. All right. Well, see you next time, guys.
See ya.
Bye.
Yeah.
Bye.